The coffee smelled burnt the way Jet Bridge coffee always does, scorched and stale under fluorescent light, and beneath it ran the cold morning smell of de-icing fluid drifting up through the accordion seams of the bridge itself. It was 6:40 in the morning at gate C14, and the line into first class had gone quiet the way lines do right before something happens. "Sir, I'm going to have to stop you here. This isn't that kind of flight." Chase Wycliffe said it without raising his voice, which was somehow worse. He said it the way a man says a thing he has said before and expects to say again, his eyes moving from Homer Red's boots to his ball cap and back down, cataloging before they'd even settled on a face. Per policy, working animals need to present with certified appearance standards. This is a first-class cabin. Homer Red was 79 years old. The dog at his heel had worn a service harness for 8 years before her retirement, had cleared airfields and checkpoints on 3 continents, and had never once failed a real test in her working life. The ticket in Homer's coat pocket had cost $1,200, paid in full, seat 2A, and the ceremony he was flying toward, a ceremony that would not wait for him, would not delay for him, would happen with him or without him, was 30 hours away. What nobody in that boarding line knew yet, not Wycliffe with his laminated card, not the dozen passengers shuffling behind him with their neck pillows and their patience running thin, was what would happen to that policy, that ceremony, and that airline's own official history before the sunset the next day. Homer's right hand stayed closed the entire time. It stayed closed through the ticket scan, and it stayed closed the second time the gate agent asked to see it again, as though a fist might read differently on a second pass. Nobody asked him what he was holding. That would come later, and when it came, it would matter more than anyone standing at that gate could have guessed. If you've ever been moved to the back for how you looked and not who you were, type steady in the comments. The dog did not bark, did not strain, did not so much as lift her ears at the raised voice above her. She sat where she'd been taught to sit 60-some years of dog handling ago, weight settled back on her haunches, spine straight, eyes on the middle distance the way a soldier holds a parade rest. Her name was Juno. She was 11 years old, retired 2 years, and she had spent this particular morning, like every October morning, for longer than the airline's newest employees had been alive, walking a route that led somewhere Homer Red would not explain to strangers, and had, in fact, never fully explained to anyone. The line held its breath. Somewhere behind the counter, a printer began to hum. The barn coat Homer wore was the color of a fence rail left 10 winters in weather, its collar gone soft and dark at the fold where his neck had worn it thin. Under it, a collared shirt ironed by habit rather than vanity, cuffs frayed to threads he had stopped noticing. His ball cap had been Marine Corps scarlet and gold once. 30 summers of sun had bleached it to the color of dried wheat, the eagle globe and anchor on the front gone soft as a rubbing on stone. He did not look like a man who belonged in seat 2A. He did not look, to the gate agent, scanning his boarding pass for the second time in 90 seconds, like a man who belonged anywhere near the front of a line. His right hand stayed closed. It had been closed since the parking shuttle, closed through the terminal, closed at security, while his left hand did the work of pulling out his belt and his boots and his one carry-on bag. When the gate agent asked, not unkindly, if everything was all right, Homer opened that same hand just enough to show he wasn't hiding anything dangerous, a flash of silver-gray metal, worn smooth, gone before she could really look, and then closed it again, the way another man might close a hand around a coin for luck, except this was not luck. This was a leash clasp, a folded, sun-bleached brass fitting worn on a length of parachute cord like a keychain fob, and along its underside, in numbers rubbed pale by decades of thumb, a serial number that if anyone had bothered to read it would have matched, exactly, the number stamped on Juno's own retired service tag, still clipped beneath her collar where it had ridden for 11 years. At his side, Juno moved when he moved and stopped when he stopped, her leash slack, her attention divided evenly between the room and the man holding it, the posture of a dog that has learned to read a hand before it moves rather than after. She did not sniff the floor. She did not eye the pastry case at the coffee kiosk the way most dogs, retired or not, could not help but do. She simply waited the way Homer waited, with the particular economy of something that has done a great deal of waiting in its life and found it did not cost as much as people thought. Twice, under his breath, so low that only Juno's ear, tuned to nearly every register of him, could have caught it clean, Homer hummed 4 bars of something. It was not a tune anyone in that boarding line would have recognized. An old hymn, plain and unhurried, the kind sung more often over canning jars in a farmhouse kitchen than in any sanctuary. He hummed it, stopped, and pressed his closed fist once against his thigh, as though checking that whatever he held was still there. Then he hummed it again. He did this the way another man might check his watch. Nobody asked him about it. Nobody yet understood there was anything to ask. The gate agent handed his boarding pass back for the second time, her mouth set in the particular apology of someone who has been told to check twice and doesn't know why. "Sorry, sir. Have a good flight." Homer nodded, touched 2 fingers to the brim of his bleached cap, said nothing, and walked with Juno down the jet bridge into the cold and the coffee smell, his right hand closed the whole way, and nobody watching him yet understood that the hand had been closed like that, on this same flight, in this same month, for longer than most of the people working that gate had held their jobs. Chase Wycliffe had been with Ravenwood Air for 6 years, and in that time he had built himself into precisely the kind of employee a training manual dreams of producing. 20 minutes before Homer reached the cabin door, a family of 5 had come aboard rattled and late, separated across 3 different boarding groups by a system error, a toddler already crying in the aisle from the noise and the strangers. Wycliffe had fixed it in under 90 seconds. No raised voice, no fuss, just a rearrangement of 2 business travelers into aisle seats with a murmured thank you and a genuine smile, the family reseated together by row 14, the toddler quieted by a stranger's offered window shade to play with. 10 minutes after that, an older man 2 rows back had gone pale and sweating in his seat, and Wycliffe had been the first to notice, kneeling in the aisle with a blood pressure cuff from the emergency kit before the purser had even finished paging for a doctor on board. Calm and precise, asking the man's name and his medications in the same even voice he used for everything. He was, by any honest measure, good at his job. So when he turned that same competence toward the man in the faded ball cap standing at the first-class door with a dog at his heel, he did it the way he did everything, with total conviction that he was right. "Sir, per policy, working and service animals boarding in premium cabins are required to present certified appearance and behavioral documentation." He held up the laminated card from his breast pocket without quite looking at it, because he had it memorized. "I'm going to need to see current certification for the animal, and I have some concerns about her presentation." "She was recon program, Camp Pendleton," Homer said. "Retired 2 years, detection work, 8 years active." "I understand that's what you're telling me." Wycliffe's tone did not change, which was its own kind of edge. "But our current standard requires a certifying vest or harness with visible agency markings, and what she's wearing doesn't meet that. I also need to note she seems tense." He gestured faintly at Juno, who had gone rigid at the press of bodies near the door, ears back, weight low, the exact posture, though no one in that cabin could have read it, of a dog bracing against noise and crowding rather than a dog preparing to do harm. A man in 3C, mid-boarding, half rose from his seat. "This is ridiculous. She's not bothering anybody." He caught Wycliffe's mild, patient look, glanced at the line stalled behind him, and sat back down, the words dying in his throat the way objections do when the whole system seems already decided. Near the galley, junior flight attendant Lindsay Tatum had gone very still. She was 26, 9 months into the job, and she had grown up 20 minutes from a Marine base, close enough that she had learned, without ever being taught it directly, to recognize a certain way of standing before she could have named what it meant. She recognized it now, in the old farmer's stillness, in the exact quality of unhurried patience in his shoulders. She said nothing. She watched. "I'll need to start the paperwork for cargo reassignment," Wycliffe said, already reaching for the tablet clipped near the door. "It's a safety protocol, not a punishment. She'll be perfectly comfortable in a climate-controlled hold." Homer's jaw did not tighten. His hand, the closed one, pressed once against his thigh. "She's not agitated," he said. "She's reading a room she doesn't trust yet. Give her a minute, she'll settle." "I appreciate that, sir, but I have 11 more rows to board and a documented behavioral flag now on file." Wycliffe was already tapping at the screen, his voice gone into the register of a man reciting something he believed completely. "Per policy, once a flag is entered, reassignment is standard. I don't have the discretion to override it." The gate agent behind him, radio in hand, had already started the call to ground crew. Homer did not raise his voice. He knelt instead, right there in the aisle with the boarding line stacking up behind him, his bad knee taking his weight with a small, private wince nobody but Lindsay caught. He put his left hand flat and low, not on Juno's head but under her chin, the old cue, and her ears came forward half an inch. His right hand, still closed, rested against his own chest. "Okay," he said to the dog, so quiet it barely carried past the second row. "Okay now." "Sir, I need you to stand. We're holding the line," Wycliffe said, not unkindly, but with the flatness of a man who had already decided the shape of the next 10 minutes. "She served 8 years, Homer said, standing brushing his knee. "Never failed a real test in her life." "I don't doubt that," Wycliffe said, in the exact tone of a man who has stopped listening to content and started listening only for compliance. "Ma'am," this to the gate agent, "can we get a handler down to receive her at the hold door?" "Yes, sir," Homer said. It was the only thing he said that sounded like agreement, and it was not agreement at all. It was the sound of a man conserving what he had left to spend. He answered every question that came after that the same way, short, true, without argument. "Is she microchipped? Yes. Has she bitten anyone? No, never. Will she resist the crate? No, she was trained to it before some of you were born, though he did not say that part, only thought it, and kept his hand closed." The gate agent typed as she walked them back through the jet bridge to the elevator, murmuring the words into her tablet as she went. Agitated, non-compliant, handler, uncooperative regarding documentation. The language of policy doing what policy does, flattening a lifetime into 3 adjectives nobody would ever be asked to defend. Lindsay stepped closer as they passed, close enough to see, for 1/2 second, the fob swinging loose from Homer's closed fist as he adjusted his grip on the leash. A brass clasp, folded and sun-worn, threaded on cord, numbers stamped along its underside gone silver pale with handling. She did not know what she was looking at. She only knew, with the same unnamed instinct that had made her go still at the door, that she had just watched something get typed into a system that was true in exactly none of the ways that mattered. Homer's hand did not open, not when Juno was led, calm and obedient and utterly correct in every motion, toward the service elevator that would carry her down into the hold, not when the elevator doors closed on the dog's steady brown eyes still finding his face through the gap. He stood in the jet bridge a moment longer than he needed to, his closed fist pressed once briefly against his sternum, and then he turned and let himself be walked to seat 34B, coach window, the $1,200 ticket in his pocket, now worth exactly nothing anyone could see. General Ambrose Stubbs boarded 11 minutes before the door closed, sweat damp from a sprint through the terminal, a garment bag over one shoulder, and a boarding pass crumpled soft in his hand. He was 74 years old, dressed like any other retired man flying economy on short notice. A windbreaker, khakis, no rank on him anywhere, and he moved down the aisle with the particular hurry of a man who hated being late for anything, mumbling apologies to the knees he brushed past. He stopped at row 34, the way a man stops when his body understands something a half second before his mind does. Homer Red sat by the window, cap in his lap, that same right hand closed loosely now over one knee. Stubbs looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then he straightened, not stiffly, not for show, but the way a spine remembers a position it held for 30 years. Heels together in the narrow aisle, chin level, and the whole economy cabin, mid-shuffle of bags and elbows, seemed to catch on the stillness of him the way cloth catches on a nail. "Steady hand," Stubbs said. The name landed in the cabin like a dropped glass. A flight attendant folding blankets 2 rows up actually stopped folding. Wycliffe, halfway through a seatback safety check, turned his head. "Sergeant Red built the handler course at Pendleton," Stubbs said, louder now, to no one and everyone, his voice catching once roughly on the rank. "1971. I was 23 years old and scared to death of my own dog, and this man taught me how to read her instead of command her. Every handler that came out of that program for 20 years learned it from him first." He looked down the aisle toward the front of the plane, toward the empty space where a service crate should have been rolling up a jet bridge with a dog inside it. "Where is his partner?" Nobody answered right away. That silence was its own answer. "She's in the hold," Lindsay said, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. There was a behavioral flag, per the new appearance policy. Stubbs turned to look at Wycliffe with an expression that held no anger in it at all, which somehow made it worse than anger would have. "You put a recon program detection dog with 8 years of active service in unpressurized cargo," he said, "because she didn't have the right vest on." Wycliffe's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out of it. The laminated card was still in his hand, and for the first time since he'd pulled it that morning, he looked down at it as though he wasn't sure what it was for. The trouble, and everyone standing in that aisle would learn this within the hour, was that the paperwork does not unfile itself simply because a general remembers a sergeant's name. The reassignment had already gone through. The crate had already been loaded. Juno was already 40 feet below their shoes in a hold meant for luggage, alone in the dark with a serial number on her collar, and no way to know that a word had just been spoken above her that changed everything except, for the moment, her own circumstances. 9 minutes after the cabin door was meant to close, it hadn't. A ground crew radio crackled at the jet bridge podium, and the gate agent's face changed in a way that made Lindsay cross the galley without being asked. "She's not settling," the voice on the radio said, thin and worried. "Won't take water from the cup we offered. She's up against the crate door, not aggressive, just... she won't stop. We're going to have to hold pushback." Wycliffe took the radio himself, and something in his posture had gone loose since the general's word had landed on him. The crisp policy voice thinned out to something closer to a young man realizing he's further out over the water than he meant to swim. "Copy," he said. "Copy. Hold." He set the radio down and picked up his tablet instead, and it was there, scrolling back through the incident he had filed not 15 minutes earlier, that his face changed a second time. "There's a flag," he said, mostly to himself, then looked up, finding Lindsay. "There's a flag on him, too, not just the dog." He turned the tablet so she could see. "Passenger status, non-compliant during boarding procedure. Recommend review prior to any sponsored appearance or public program participation." That's not... I didn't write that," Wycliffe said. "That's an auto flag. It pulls from a liability template." Lindsay had already opened the airline's internal portal on her own phone, scrolling with the quick, anxious competence of someone who had learned in 9 months exactly which folders held the truth nobody advertised. "Ravenwood's a sponsor for tomorrow's ceremony," she said. "The Camp Colvin dedication. There's a clause, sponsor liability review. Any passenger with an active non-compliance flag can be barred from participating in a company-affiliated public event pending review." She looked up. "He's not just missing his seat. If this flag stands, he might not be allowed to speak at his own ceremony tomorrow." Stubbs, still standing in the aisle because no one had thought yet to tell a general to sit down, absorbed this with the flat quiet of a man recalculating a battle plan. "What ceremony?" he said, though he already half knew, because it was the same ceremony folded into his own garment bag in program form, the same one he'd flown out on short notice to attend. "The Working Dog Memorial," Lindsay said. "Dedications at noon tomorrow. Camp Colvin." "I approved that program," Stubbs said slowly, as though the sentence cost him something to finish. "I signed off on it 2 weeks ago." Homer had said nothing this whole time. He sat with his cap back in his lap, hand closed, eyes on the middle distance the way Juno's had been at the gate, and when he finally spoke, it was not to defend himself. "She won't eat off a stranger's hand in the dark," he said. "Never has. Somebody needs to go down there before she works herself sick." Wycliffe looked at him, then at the tablet, then at the radio, and something in the set of his shoulders came apart entirely, the practiced calm of a man who fixes toddlers and blood pressure cuffs meeting. For the first time that morning, a problem his laminated card had no clause for. "I can authorize an escort to the hold," he said. "I can do that much." "Do it," Stubbs said. And for a moment the retired general and the 6-year cabin lead looked at each other like two men standing on the same side of a door neither had built. The service elevator dropped them into a world of engine hum and cold, unpainted steel, cargo netting strung along the walls like something half-finished. Juno's crate sat under a single work light, and even from 30 feet, Homer could see the shape of her pressed against the mesh door, not thrashing, not snapping, worse than that in its way, rigid, fixed, a dog holding a post nobody had ordered her to hold. "She's not aggressive," Homer said, kneeling stiff before the crate, his bad knee taking the floor without complaint this time. "She's not dangerous. She's grieving a version of herself nobody wrote down." Nobody in that hold, not Stubbs, not Lindsay, not the two ground crew men standing back with their arms crossed, asked him to explain that. It explained itself in what he did next. He did not open the crate. He set his closed right hand against the mesh, low, at the level of her chest, and let the fob inside his fist swing free for the first time all morning, tapping the brass clasp twice, softly, against the wire, a sound with a particular pitch, metal on metal in a specific rhythm, the sound of 100 kennel doors closed the same exact way over decades of a training program built by exactly one man. Juno's ears came up. Her rigid stance broke by degrees, haunches lowering, weight shifting back onto her hind legs the way she'd once been taught before either of these ground crewmen had been hired. "Down," Homer said, so quiet it was nearly breath, and made one motion with his left hand, flat palm, dropped slow, a signal that predated hand signals most working dog programs use now. A signal Stubbs's own eyes went wide at recognizing from a lecture hall 48 years gone. Juno's whole body settled onto the crate floor like something unclenching. "That's the old release cue," Stubbs said, quiet, almost to himself. "Nobody teaches that anymore. I haven't seen that since 1971. I built the sound before I built the words," Homer said, still kneeling, still tapping the clasp once more, gentler now, a period at the end of a sentence. "Dogs read sound faster than command. Man who wrote your current manual never handled a real detection dog a day in his life. He read a report about one." Stubbs was quiet for a long moment, watching Juno's ribs slow under the mesh, watching the old man's hand, the same hand that had stayed closed through an entire boarding process, finally uncurl fully for the first time that morning, flat against the crate door, still. "Homer," Stubbs said, and something in his voice had gone rough at the edges. "The program's founding name on tomorrow's plaque isn't yours." Homer didn't look up. "Never expected it would be." "No," Stubbs said. "I mean, I signed the approval 2 weeks ago, and I don't remember the name on it being wrong, because I never thought to check whose name should have been there in the first place." 9 minutes later, they were airborne. The crate secured back in the hold with a ground crew supervisor personally confirming water and a soft blanket and a promise, made mostly to Homer's face rather than to any manual, that someone would check on her every 20 minutes. Wycliffe had gone quiet in a way that suited him poorly, moving through the cabin service with none of his morning's polish, as though the script he'd been running on for 6 years had lost a page. Stubbs had taken the seat beside Homer without asking, his garment bag wedged overhead, and somewhere over 400 miles of cloud he pulled up the ceremony program on his phone and turned the screen so Homer could see it too. "Founding Partnership Credit," Stubbs read. "Camp Colvin K-9 Detection Program, established through the generous support of Ravenwood Air and under the direction of—" He stopped. "Read it again." "Red isn't on here at all, Homer. It credits a training coordinator named on a memo I don't even recognize." "Spencer Pemberton," Lindsay said, leaning over the seat back from the row behind, tablet in hand, having spent the last half hour doing the quiet forensic work of a woman who had decided, somewhere over Nebraska, that she was done merely watching. "He's Ravenwood's Regional Customer Experience Director. I found the policy memo, 3 years old." She turned the screen so both men could read it. It's the same document. The appearance standard rewrite that flagged Juno this morning, and a footnote crediting the K-9 Partnership's founding to the training coordinator, listed on the original sponsor contract, quote, "for continuity of branding purposes." "Continuity of branding," Stubbs repeated, the words sitting strange and cold in his mouth. "There was a complaint," Lindsay said, scrolling. "Years back. One family said a service dog looked unkempt at a gate in another city. Nothing to do with Homer, nothing to do with Juno. Pemberton rewrote the whole boarding standard off one complaint to cut down on liability paperwork before some review. And it looks like, while he was rewriting things, he cleaned up the sponsor credit too. Simpler to have one clean company name on a program than track down who actually built it 40 years before he had the job." Homer sat with that a moment, hands finally still in his lap, the fob resting loose across his palm instead of locked inside a fist. "He never met me," Homer said. It wasn't a question. No, Lindsay said. I don't think he knew you were alive. That's the same paper, Stubbs said, half to himself, working it through like a man walking a perimeter he'd walked before but never in this direction. The rule that nearly put your dog in an unpressurized hold, and the memo that erased your name from a program you built with your own 2 hands. Same signature, same year, same decision. He wasn't trying to hurt you. He didn't know you existed. He just wanted the paperwork to look clean before somebody above him asked hard questions. He looked at his phone again, at the clock in the corner of the screen. Foundry casts the plaque at 8 tonight. After that, it's bronze. It doesn't get uncast. Then we've got till 8, Homer said and reached for his hat. They landed with 90 minutes to the Foundry deadline, the runway wet with a rain that had passed through an hour before, and General Stubbs was on his phone before the seatbelt sign had finished its chime, working through a short list of numbers that still answered when a 2-star retired called them, however many years it had been. He spoke to a foundation director, then to someone at the memorial committee, then to a museum curator who owed him a favor from 1989, each call shorter than the last because each person he reached had fewer questions once they heard the words Camp Pendleton Handler Course and 48 years, and this was never corrected. Wycliffe did not wait to be asked twice. He found a service terminal near the jet bridge and sat with it the way a man sits down to a confession, retyping the morning's incident report line by line. Agitated and non-compliant replaced, deliberately, with Handler demonstrated advanced de-escalation technique consistent with prior military K-9 training, passenger cooperative throughout, his hands moving slower than they had all morning, getting every word right instead of every word fast. When ground crew wheeled Juno's crate up from the hold, he did not wait for a handler to be assigned. He crouched, unlatched the door himself, and lifted the crate's forward end with both arms, walking her off the tarmac at Homer's side without being told to, the laminated card nowhere on him now. She took water 20 minutes ago, he said, quieter than Homer had heard him say anything all day. I checked myself. Twice. Homer looked at him for a long moment, not with triumph, nothing in his face that resembled a settled score, and said only, obliged. A memorial committee liaison met them at the curb, breathless, asking whether Sergeant Red, Master Sergeant, Stubbs corrected gently, without heat, would be willing to say a few words at tomorrow's dedication now that the program credit was being reviewed overnight. Homer's answer came in the same short, load-bearing sentences he'd used all day. Not about me, he said. About the 300 that came through that course. They're the ones still working dogs on runways and in schools and in wildfire country right now. Say their names if you're going to say any. And the program credit itself, the liaison said. The plaque. Homer was quiet a moment, his hand finding Juno's head where she stood leaning, exhausted and calm, against his leg. Put her name next to mine, he said. Juno, not just a detection dog. She served 8 years. She's earned the letters of it same as anybody. They gave him a quiet room near the terminal's chapel to wait in while the paperwork moved through channels faster than paperwork usually moves when a general is making the calls. And it was there, alone with the dog for the first time since the jet bridge that morning, that Homer knelt one more time, his bad knee finding the tile without argument, and pressed the leash clasp fob flat against Juno's collar, its worn brass warm from his hand. There now, he said. There now, girl. He hummed the 4 bars again, low, the same ones he'd hummed at the gate, Opal's old canning hymn, the one she used to hum over autumn tomatoes going into jars with a sound like small bells. And this time, he let it run 1 bar further than he had all day before he caught himself and stopped, his hand resting flat and open now, fully open against the dog's ribs, checking nothing in particular and everything at once. Noon the next day came in clean October light over Camp Colvin, the kind of light that makes bronze look warmer than it is and old men look younger than they are, and the plaque stood on its stand under a drop cloth while a crowd of perhaps 200 waited in folding chairs on the grass. Handlers. Homer had trained decades ago, now gray themselves, a scatter of active-duty dog teams at parade rest along the tree line, a color guard, and near the back, standing rather than sitting, in slacks and a jacket that was clearly not a uniform of any kind, Chase Wycliffe, on his own time, having asked the memorial committee, quietly and without explaining why, whether he might be allowed to attend. The corrected plaque, cast overnight and delivered by a foundry courier who had driven through the dark to make the noon unveiling, read, "Founded and built by Master Sergeant Homer Red, USMC, 1971, and carried forward by every handler and dog who trained in his name." Beneath it, smaller, a second line, added at Homer's own insistence and General Stubbs's signature. "In service alongside Juno, Detection K9, 8 years active duty." When the drop cloth came away, there was no applause at first, only the particular silence of 200 people reading something true for the first time. Then it came, low and rolling, not the crowd noise of a game won, but the sound of a debt acknowledged. And through all of it, Juno stood at heel beside Homer's leg, calm as she had ever been in her working life, unbothered by the color guards' rifles snapping to present arms, unbothered by the crowd pressing close afterward to shake a hand that could finally, fully, open to take theirs. He's not agitated, Homer thought, watching her lean her weight briefly against his knee, the way she had leaned against it in that quiet chapel room the night before. He's not agitated. He never had been, not really, only carrying all these years a version of himself nobody had thought to write down. And now, for one clean afternoon in October light, somebody finally had. 3 weeks later, the light came down gold and low over Colvin County, catching the porch rail the way it does every evening in that particular week of fall when the hay is in and the cattle have settled and there's nothing left to do but sit. Homer Red sat in the chair Opal used to sit in beside him, though he never said that to anyone. And Juno lay stretched full length across his boots, asleep, one paw twitching faintly at some dream that was probably, mercifully, about nothing more than rabbits. By the door, hung from a nail he'd driven into the frame himself the week they got home, the leash clasp hung loose on its length of parachute cord, swinging faintly whenever the screen door moved. It did not ride in his fist anymore. It had not needed to, not since that chapel room, not since a plaque came out from under a drop cloth with 2 names on it instead of one wrong one. Homer hummed the hymn once, low, the way he always did at the end of a long day, and this time he let it run its whole 4 bars, and then its next 4, all the way through to the end for the first time in longer than he could easily count, Opal's old canning season tune, finding its final note in the quiet, the way it used to over jars cooling on a towel in a kitchen 40 years gone. Some Debts Fly coach for 48 years before anyone thinks to check who's sitting in the last row. The dog sighed once in her sleep. The porch light came on by itself, timed to the falling dark, and Homer Red sat very still, hands open and empty in his lap, at peace.